sometimes we have this, you said it in the sermon actually, this toxic positivity. I love that term because it's lying to yourself that everything's okay even though it's not. There's something about that I'd love to pick your brain on, and it's the role of lament. The scriptures, particularly in the book of Psalms, has psalm after psalm, passage after passage of David or other writers lamenting, saying, God, this is terrible. This is awful. My soul is overwhelmed. My heart is like wax. The imagery in there is absolutely beautiful. Talk to me about the role of lamenting as we're suffering. Like, is there a point where it's too much, or because I see this on both sides. I see people who just complain and it's good. They're in touch and in tune with their emotions. But then there's people who don't do it at all. And if I'm honest, I'm skeptical of those people. I'm skeptical that nothing's ever wrong in your life, or I'm jealous. I'll be honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first to the lament thing, that's a form of worship that we've kind of gotten away from.
To quote you, say more.
Yeah. No.
That's good.
No, it's like when you look at any of the laments, like the laments of David in the Psalms, they always start out actually from this really kind of dark place where it's kind of like, God, where are you?
You all right, bro?
What's up? Did you see this? It seems like you didn't.
Yeah.
It starts from this dark place, but they all end in something like, still I will trust in you. Something like that.
The perspective reminder.
Yeah. And just like I've said about doubt, it leads you somewhere. And so lament leads you somewhere. It can lead you again into cynicism or just negativity or giving up hope or giving up faith, or it can lead you to worship. And one of the things I've been leaning into this because we're not wired this way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you see somebody, I just talked to somebody and they're like, they actually uncovered this thing because you're like, how you doing? And it's like, fine. In our culture, we say busy.
Yep.
But you never really it would be strange if someone was like, I'm not doing okay.
Right.
And so we have this, some of it's keeping up appearances. Some of it, I think, is we don't want to trouble people with our struggles. Sometimes just the kind of the non-linear, there's not really shape and feel. We can't navigate our way through our feelings.
Yeah.
That uncertainty causes us to hold back. Sometimes we don't even want to do that with God because we have this idea that, we should kind of have it all together before God. And so this idea of lament is very foreign to us. But, it's interesting. Like, my mother passed away when I was 15.
Yeah.
And, we had so many good people around us, but they just didn't have a category. Most people don't have a category for death. They really don't have a category for death with like kids. When it's a 15-year-old who that happened to. And so many people with the best intentions tried to make sense of that. That passage in Romans, God works all things together for good. And I was sitting there as a 15-year-old. I'm like, this isn't good.
Yeah.
I don't have a mom. I'm going home to an empty house. This isn't good. And it's with the best intentions that people do that. But I think part of lament and part of life, and actually part of the Christian life, is just calling things bad.
Yeah.
But then leading somewhere with it. You say, this is bad. And that's the thing Peter does really throughout the book, is he says, yeah, you're going through some stuff right now and it's not good. And you're right on the edge, but.
Yeah.
And I think if we can learn this is bad, but part, that will make us much healthier people, because what happens with all that stuff is it actually just builds up in our lives. It builds up in our souls.
Yeah.
We carry it around. It manifests itself in some really, just really wacky ways.
It has to go somewhere.
Yeah, it does
right?
go somewhere.
Right. There's a lot of writings around how the body keeps the score.
Yes.
Anxiety and emotional stress and the weight that plays on our bodies. I used to just dismiss all that as non-spiritual. Now I see that as that same God that has given us those emotions has also given us physical bodies that respond to those emotions. They're all connected.
Yeah, I was going to say, now we're getting older.
We're getting older, and Advil is our friend.
Well, but we don't. I mean, as we get older, the thing you can do when you're younger is you have enough energy to outmaneuver
That's
all of
it.
those things. You can kind of stay ahead of them. You can kind of work your way around them.
Yeah.
But at some point they build up to the point, or you just, I'll speak for myself, you get older and you can't outrun them or outturn them anymore. And you have to face them. And I don't think it's any accident, people my age have midlife crises. Some of those are just like, I'm going to go buy a boat.
Sure.
But some of them are like, I actually have to face all the pain that I've been trying to, outperform, outrun, push down, whatever it is. And everyone has, out-medicate.
Yeah.
Everyone has different responses to it. But turning and facing that is actually, it is a crisis. It's a crisis moment of saying, this is actually true. And I'm carrying this. Sometimes it's looking back in your life and saying, there were some things back there that I've just kind of brushed over. They were not okay. They shouldn't have happened. There's things that were said. There's things that were done. It's naming those things. But I think back to lament, it's naming those things for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not to go back there and grind the axe.
Right.
It's to say, it's almost like there's this tank in your life that gets filled up and you have to empty the tank.
Yeah.
Or it overflows. And it overflows in all sorts of crazy ways, anger, depression.
Right.
There's clinical versions of anxiety, but there's also versions of it. I don't want to diminish those other things.
Oh, absolutely.
But there's some that are related to this as well.
And I think, as you're talking about this, there's, we've all seen the Twitter rant of just, saying the truth because it's got to be said. And there's value to that to some degree. Where I find the most power is taking that lament, but doing it in a community.
Yes.
Doing it with safe people, doing it with people who have your best in mind, who will say things that challenge your assumption, who will also say, actually, you're right on with that, or no, there's something you haven't considered. To be able to lament in a safe place is paramount in building this spiritual discipline, because that's really what it is, right? You need to be able to call things out. You need to be able to do it with a safe person, and you need to be able to move past it in a healthy way that doesn't just get stuck on it, hoping for justice that might never come.
Yeah. And this is again where our culture, our Christian culture, doesn't help us, because we are, are rugged individuals. We live in a rugged individualism country and to some degree Western world. And it says, this is between me and God. Jesus is my personal savior. Some of us have heard that terminology. What's interesting in the Bible is it was never written that way. It's very rarely, especially like the New Testament, the letters and
to the
things.
church to the believers like it's never like to Joey. It's never that.
There's a couple where it is, but it's mostly, it's just assumed
that you're doing life.
Community.
Yeah, you're doing life together.
And we, the pandemic a few years ago, certainly it just accelerated a trend,
Totally.
I think, but there's a trend of isolation and individualism, and ironic, and there's positive and negative expressions of that. But ironically, if you look at things like the depression rate and you track those with these other things, it's a little uncanny how they correlate. And I think that the challenge, and I think you've touched on something that's really good, because if we try to lament in isolation, we'll actually deceive ourselves. That becomes, because it is such a strong thing that can kind of go for good or for ill. It can go positively or negatively. That is a moment where we will fall into temptation and isolation and actually deceive ourselves and become cynical and go the wrong way. You can't do this alone. And I think, one of the great gifts of a healthy church community is that it's a place where it's safe to do this, but where there's a structure, where there's a mirror of truth around doing this. The best thing about a church isn't sermons and songs and kids ministry. It's this.
It's the community.
Yeah.
It's the people. List any church where you have found belonging, acceptance, and growth in your life. The people are a part of that. It's never just, the pastor was really good, because like you said, with the pandemic, we have now pivoted into this digital economy where I don't have to go to a church to receive the messages from the pastor. We've all just said we have to make our content available online.
Yeah. And here we are producing content.
Here we are, right?
Online.
And some of our listeners are probably never going to step into to the doors of our church. That's all good and great, but the power of the Spirit in you and the Spirit in me is that when we get together, not only does the Spirit affirm what we're going through in ways that are transformative, but it was never designed. I mean, God in and of itself is not isolated. He's got Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There's a communal aspect even to the nature of God. Why do we think that we can get away with doing it without other people?
Well, it seems more controllable. It's more linear.
Yep.
It really comes back to control.
The other thing too with that is that if I got hurt, I won't get hurt again. And if I eliminate other people, I can control the level of hurt.
Yeah, and we need, I think the church, I will as a pastor,
absolutely,
we need to own this.
Yep.
We need to own that.
Let's speak that one out.
Yeah, churches have been unsafe places that have, added chains to people rather than broken them.
We have used people, we have manipulated situations, and unfortunately, in maybe the best of intentions and unfortunately bad intentions, we have damaged people's perception of being able to connect to God through community.
Yeah, and I don't think that's, we're human, we're fallen, we're broken. I don't think that's ever 100% avoidable.
Yeah.
But I think we need to own that. I think that, Christians individually, churches at large, I think the thing it's easy to do is to just kind of dismiss that part of the story because we have a vision and we're going into the future and God's got great stuff. Or to, when something really terrible happens, to just kind of push it under because we don't want to damage what quote unquote God is doing.
Right.
And, God works through the good, but he works through the pain too. And sometimes he works more profoundly when we're brought low in humility because of just how badly we've screwed things up.
Right.
The good news is, those are, like we were saying before, those aren't good things when that happens, but God can still redeem something out of them. It might not be the good we want, but it can be something. And so coming to that with humility is incredibly important. It's incredibly important. That's the way this community thing works. And anytime you see, like the Apostle Paul talks about in Philippians chapter 2, it's drenched in humility. It's drenched in saying, don't think of yourself better than you ought to. You have to start from this place of where Jesus started, which he was entitled to certain things. He was the Son of God, but he gave himself. And so it's starting from that point of, this isn't about what I get. This is about what I get to give. And when other people are working through that, it's allowing that kind of that difficulty, that messiness, that just nonlinear thing that we all hate because we all want to just give an answer and have a prescription and, know how to get out of it in 30 minutes. But it's doing it pointing back to Jesus, pointing back to Jesus, pointing back to Jesus, which is, I think, why, in 1 Peter, that's why he does that.
Yeah.
He just keeps coming back to it. Like when I've preached this, it's like, oh, we're back. We're talking about this again.
It's coming back.
But it is the thing. It is the most important.